Now let's talk about resolving a bug. There are a few moving parts involved here. First, we dispatch an API call action. Our API middleware is going to pick that action and send a patch request to this endpoint. Then, upon success, it's going to call this reducer. Now, forget about all these moving parts. What is the behavior we need to test? The fact that when we resolve a bug, if it's successfully saved to the server, the store should be updated. How it happens, it doesn't matter. It may change in the future, but the fact that the store should be updated will not change. So in our test file, here's our group for the bug slice. In this group, I'm going to create a new test. So it should mark the bug as resolved if it's saved to the server. You could word it differently, okay? That's totally fine. Now, in this test, we need to dispatch the resolveBug action. So let's import it on the top. resolveBug. Now, back to our test. So let's follow the AAA pattern. In the arrange part, we need to program our fake axis object. So fake axis on patch. If you have a request to this endpoint, we should get a response with the status code of 200 and this object. A bug with the ID 1, description A, and resolved. So the server officially tells us that the bug is resolved. Now, in this case, we don't really need the description property because that's not what we're testing. We're not going to have any assertions on this property. So we can simplify our test and keep this object minimal. So this was the arrange part. In the act part, we need to dispatch an action. So store.dispatch resolveBug with the ID 1. Now, because here we have an asynchronous operation, we need to await this call and mark our test as async. Pretty straightforward. And finally, in the assertion part, we go to the bug slice, then to our array of bugs. We get the first bug object and expect its resolved property to be true. Now there is a problem. When we run this test, our array of bugs is going to be empty. We don't have a bug in our store because every test runs in an isolated word. So even though we have other tests that add a bug to our store, when we run this test, we're going to have a store with a clean, fresh state. And that's a best practice because we don't want the state changes by one test to impact other tests. So every test should start from a fresh, clean state, okay? So what we need to do here is to create this bug first before we can resolve it. So in the arrange part, once again, we need to program our fake axis object. So if we get a post request to this endpoint, we should get this reply. A bug object with the ID 1. So the server generates this ID for us, okay? Now, before resolving a bug, let's create it. Here's a simple bug object. We could also add the description property. It doesn't make a difference. So I'm going to get rid of it. That's better. So this is our test. Now, you might argue that here we're testing multiple things. We're not just testing the resolveBug action. Well, it doesn't really matter because we're not testing a single function. We're testing the behavior of our system. We're testing a unit of work, not a single function, okay? So it's totally fine to dispatch multiple actions because we're interacting with the system like a real-life scenario, okay? So let's save the changes and run our tests. All tests passing. Now, these login statements are getting a little bit annoying, so I'm going to disable the login middleware. So let's go to configure store module and comment this out. Good. Now back to our test file. So we have tested the happy path, but what if the server returns an error? In other words, what if the server cannot update this bug? Then the store should not be updated. And if the store is not updated, the UI will not be updated either. So we need a second test to test the negative path. So let's copy and paste this. Change the label. Should not mark the bug as resolved if it's not saved to the server. So if we send a patch request to this endpoint, we should get an internal server error. That's 500. Now, we need to change our assertion. So the resolve property should not be true. Okay? Let's save the changes and run our tests. All tests passing. Beautiful. Now let's get our coverage report one more time. Suggest -- coverage. Look at our store. It's getting better test coverage. Earlier, we had a red bar here because we had only 41% test coverage. Now we are at 56%. The more tests we write, the better coverage we'll get. You'll see that in the next lesson.